Nope, still clear. Everything's good. Oh, I myself. Yeah.
Okay, so then this is another test. Let me see if this works. Okay, so then this is. I figured it out. This is so weird. Okay, I have to have two cameras of myself. All right, I think I fixed LinkedIn and everything, so we should be good. Um, so you can come back if you want. I just got to get my tablet set up. This is so scattered. I wanted to have this all ready and pretty, but it's okay. This is how this works. Once I get my screen set up, this will be fun. Excellent. Okay, so let me screen share with you, friend. So I'll move this all over to the side. I almost know what I want to do. Okay, there. No, shoot. Perfect. Everything's working. This is so crazy. And then I'll screen share with you, so you'll be able to see this. That should work for you. And then I need to get my tablet set up, and then we could have fun. And in the future, because we've learned, things will be faster. Now that I know all the magic buttons to hit, hopefully. So I'm just gonna, thanks for the thumbs up. By the way, do you go by Pin or Pin How? How would you like it to say your name?
Pinhole is fine. Yep.
Okay, beautiful. So how did you cross paths with me on LinkedIn? Because it's been really cool interacting with you. Um,
Um, I forget which LinkedIn post was it that I saw your comment, and then I think
okay.
I sent you a connection request or something, and then you texted me back, and then we just hit it off, I guess.
I know we've been interacting for feels
Yeah,
like
it's just
months
random
now.
connection, you
Uh,
know? Yeah.
yeah, it's been beautiful. And then, so you're in the academia spaces, right?
Yeah, I'm a grad student. Hopefully, I'll be graduating soon. In a
Okay,
few months, hopefully. We'll see.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what are you hoping to do once you graduate? Because I know you've been looking at endovascular robotics, like that's an area of focus, right?
Yeah, yeah, there's one possibility. I'm not sure yet. Still exploring. I still have time to think when I'm writing. You know,
Uh-huh.
so not too worried yet. I still have a few months at least to go.
Okay. So did you do
Maybe
I'm
in a few months. Mhm.
sorry for cutting you off. So you did an undergrad in mechanical, I'm guessing, or biomedical, and then what are you
Yeah,
doing a graduate
yeah,
studies in?
mechanical. Yeah, I'm mechanical through and through. So my major in PhD is in mechanical as well, but I'm
Awesome.
working in a neuro technology lab. We are doing like mouse brain imaging, which
That's
is kind
fun.
of far away from surgical robotics or whatever. But it's a just a different end user, you know. Like it's a
Yeah,
mouse subject and not a surgeon. Yeah,
that's so exciting. Like,
but it's fun.
how did
Yeah.
you get on this path?
Looking back, it's just like how we met. Like everything's random. I was in like a 3 minute thesis presentation when I was new, and then I met someone in like a breakout room. It was in 2020, so everything was virtual on
Yeah.
Zoom.
Mhm.
And then they are just like, "Oh, are you new here in the department?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then they're like, what are you looking for? I'm like, I don't know, medical robotics kind of thing. And he's like, oh, our PI recently have a new grant,
Mhm.
and they might be looking for people. I was like, cool, let me talk to them. And one thing led to another, and I'm here.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you finish up your master's in a couple months, you're saying? And then you're moving on to something different? Yeah.
So I'm in the PhD program right now. So hopefully I'll be done this year.
Okay.
And then we'll have to find something after, yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, good luck. I know that's a
Yeah.
very long haul. I know that's super challenging
Yeah,
for sure.
just took me like 6 years,
Awesome. So are you looking for opportunities too? And then we'll jump into neurovascular. It's just fun to get to know you. But like, are you trying to get into a different robotics platform or do you want to stay in academia forever?
Hopefully not.
Okay. That's fine. It's fine. Everyone's got a different path. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there's not a lot of money in academia, right? At least from what I see.
Yeah.
So ideally would go into industry. Um, but I am not opposed to stay in academia for a while. Just
Mhm.
just to kind of see what's the frontier like, what's like the state of the art, what's like the newest and the greatest that's happening. Um, yeah. So and then I was a TA for medical robotics class, which is Team Kowalski.
Mhm.
And then they had some partnership going on, and then I was fortunate enough to be with the right person at the right time, to,
Yeah.
to kickstart some of the things that he's doing. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for all the context and for sharing so much because I think you were probably the lead researcher for this project besides myself. And then I'm you sent me so much, which was really helpful. And for anyone else who may be watching as we kind of kick off the webinar, the goal of this is just to loosely explore opportunities in neurovascular robotics. I use something called the innovation trifecta. So let me draw that up for you. And if you've watched some of my content, you're probably aware of it, but now I'll be talking with you and to whoever else watches this recording. So let me click some more magic buttons. Screen share. Thanks for being part of this pilot, Pinhao. I appreciate it. So yeah, the innovation trifecta, and this is kind of what governs like how I approach innovation. That might be helpful for you is you have an unmet need. So this is a clinical unmet need, clinical unmet need. You have technical feasibility, ability. You have commercial viability, viability, spelling like an engineer. And what I've found over the last decade progressing surgical robotics at J&J and then doing entrepreneurship and consulting startups and medtech for the last year and a half or so is this is the corners are typically where startups go to die. Oh, hey, Vincente. Enzo's here. This is awesome. Thanks for the encouragement. Enzo's on watching on YouTube or LinkedIn. So we have two people I get to hang out with and nerd out on with robotics, which is great. So typically whether you're in like a large strategic often gets stuck here. So like a Johnson and Johnson, you'll have a lot of engineers that have worked on a stapler and they get lost in the world of how do you make the stapler incrementally better. And a lot of times this will be distant from the clinical unmet need. Like, how are you actually improving a clinician's workflow and providing value in those spaces? And often it can be segmented from the needs of the commercial team and how would they actually be able to position this relative to what they're already selling and how are you incentivizing that group. So a lot of times you'll have this is what I would call like tech push, and you still need to push the tech forward, but a lot of times a large strategic gets stuck here. And then clinical unmet need, like the best way to describe this corner is you have a innovative surgeon who continues to have the same challenge in surgery. And again, it could also be a nurse or someone else in the clinical space as a doctor. And they have a great idea if it would be wonderful if this device was this much longer, could do this thing. A lot of times they come up with great ideas, but they have no idea how to actually manufacture it and produce it at scale at a great cost point, and they have no commercial strategy of either an exit or whether this continues to be a standalone company. So they get stuck in this corner. And then commercial viability is often just sales reps wishing that they could sell the right thing and they don't have it and it doesn't fit the larger tech platform. So I like to help people work across this and get centered. And when we go through neurovascular robotics, we're going to spend a bit of time talking about why I think this is kind of centered in the innovation trifecta. The other fun thing I do is this is all wrapped in brand, and branding gives you pricing power in the market. So, for instance, Johnson Johnson, Medtronic, Intuitive, they'll have a very strong brand recognition within clinicians. They're trusted. So when they do commercialize a new technology, it is easier to adopt at scale within a global context. So branding also gives you pricing, premium, and strength in the market. So that's kind of what we're going to chat through as we jump into neurovascular robotics, which should be fun. So before we do that, like this big. So today's sponsors, we have a couple for this event. The first of which is Kinetic Vision. So let me see if I can click on this. So I am partners with this amazing company called Kinetic Vision. They do consulting work and digital transformations. So they've partnered with me in a lot of really great work. I won't play this video, but I have a wait list if you want to learn a bit more about what they do. They were a huge supporter of me when I was out in Japan. We did a lot of things I can't share from a technology development perspective. And I've worked with a lot of different engineering consultants, and they're top tier in more ways than I can share. So this will bring you through a quick wait list with a couple questions to see if their services could be of help to you and your projects as you're trying to digitize different solutions. They have VR capabilities, digital twins. They can scan full production environments and then bring that into a digital space to look for process optimizations. This video shows like all the cool stuff and has a bit of my testimonial in it as well. So there's a link right there if you want to check out Kinetic Vision. They're a great partner for you down the road as you step out into your career as well. And then the other sponsor is me. So I have a little mini wait list here that goes through some of my backstory. I think I filmed this in the Honda Odyssey while my kids were sleeping. And I just talked through some of the work I did at Johnson & Johnson and how I help other startups. And then this asks a couple questions if there's different ways for me to collaborate with you. And that way I can provide service in those spaces. So those are the two sponsors, me and KV. And then let's jump into the meat. So make this bigger. And then this will all be in a classroom under the school medtech community. So if I go over here really quick. So we have the community. Eventually I'll have a nice thumbnail, but there's like this premium VIP vault. So for eventually members who pay, I'm going to start to add all these recordings from these sessions, but then also all the notes organized per session. And my goal is next month to be able to do one of these sessions in colorectal cancer care and looking at leaks, and leak detection is kind of my main goal there. And then each month the community can kind of pick what the next research project looks like based on what everyone's interested in. Okay, so when we talk about neurovascular robots, the golden goose like is a telesurgical robotic stroke mechanical thrombectomy in rural hospital networks, and the ability to also do coronary and peripheral vascular. So I'm going to break down exactly what this sentence means. This is like a high level summary of why do we care about these spaces in general. And then we'll go through some statistics. We'll go through the innovation trifecta. So looking at the clinical unmet needs, the standard of care, and then we'll just kind of keep going deep and rolling through it. But at a very high level, let me pull back up my little sketch pad so I can make this clear for folks. Okay, so and how you're going to love these pictures. They're so bad. Okay, so this is someone experiencing a stroke. Very proportionate. Okay. They're not happy because in their brain, there is a blocked vessel vein. I always get this mixed up in my head. And by the way, you can correct me if I ever say anything wrong clinically, because I know you're much deeper in these spaces than me. But basically, you want to find a way to navigate through the vasculature, I think you come in through the groin, and the femoral artery is one of the main approaches. And you'd basically come in with a catheter, which is kind of a tube inside of a tube. So it has a working channel. And there's different ways to get this all the way up here. And the stroke occurs because you have a blockage well, there's two ways that we can do strokes, and I'll get to this in the standard of care. But there's a blockage that's occurring right here. Is going to be an ischemic stroke. And that's preventing blood flow from getting to a region of the brain. So this starts to die. And that can cause cognitive challenges, motor skill challenges, permanent disability, and death. And the goal is to remove this blockage as quickly as possible. This is in, again, ischemic strokes. If I say that correctly, I got to check my language right here. Not hemorrhagic strokes. Ischemic. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not a doctor. So basically, the goal is to take this clot and remove it physically out through this working channel. And when I share the golden goose, it would be to be able to do this procedure remotely. So you would have a clinician far away, and then you'd have a small clinical team close to this patient that could use a robot to do all of this, that the clinician far away clinician is doing telesurgery. And the reason this is so important is because every minute you're losing like 1.3 million neurons, or 1.9 million neurons die every minute that a stroke occurs, loosely. So the grand challenge that everyone's kind of getting after is how you could do this in a remote manner. Mechanical thrombectomy is physically removing that clot, because if the clot's too large, you can't remove it with purely a pharmaceutical solution, which we'll also get to as well. And the patients that are most at risk, at least in a US context, but probably globally, is those that are in rural areas. And we'll get through why they are disproportionately impacted by strokes, because they can't get to the right care facility as quickly as possible. And then to extend the golden goose, or the main opportunity, is if you can make a robot that can work up this channel to get here, you could also make a robot that can go into small peripheral areas of the body, or also work into the heart, which is coronary. So if you could create a robot that hits those three contexts, then that's going to help increase your volumes or your use of that robot in the operating space, which creates a better justification for large capital investment in that piece of equipment. Whereas if it's purely neurovascular, you have a smaller TAM, or theoretical applied market, I think is what TAM stands for. I always forget. Basically, the total addressable market, there you go, is a little bit smaller. So you also want to roll in endovascular robotic opportunities to get to the peripheral vascular, which is just farther away, as well as coronary, which is working in the heart. Okay, so some fun statistics. And by the way, I don't specifically cite every single statistic to every single thing that I found it in. So from an academic perspective, this is not perfect from a research project. But what I did do at the very bottom is I have all of my sources with links. Big shout out to Steve Bell. He did a great video and great content that walks through neurovascular robotics that I did lift content from, because his stuff is always solid. And then there's a lot of links that you shared, and a few others that I'm going to keep adding. I have more homework beyond this session as well. And for anyone watching, I think a little bit of context to this is I was tapped on the shoulder for a CTO role at a neurovascular company, and that's what sparked all of these requests. And then now we get to share all this research externally, which is super cool. All right. Pin, how is the pacing okay? I've never done this before. This is my first nerd webinar. I got thumbs up. Okay, cool.
Yep.
If it's good for you, then hopefully it's good for the rest of the world. Okay, so let's get into some fun statistics, and we'll take some time with this. The first one that really hit me was 1 out of 6 people experience a stroke in their lifetime. I dedicated a decade of my life working in soft tissue robotics and laparoscopic instruments, open surgical instruments for lung cancer, colon cancer, gastric bypass, all of those diseases, like I was very aware of, But before I was tapped on the shoulder for this opportunity, I was completely blind to stroke. Like I've never experienced it in my family, any extended family. Just wasn't looking out for it. But I have 4 kids and a wife. So I started doing the numbers with that. I was like, shoot, so one of us will experience a stroke in our lifetime, potentially per statistics. And I was like, that's insane to me to imagine my son or my daughter or my other son or my other daughter or my wife or me. And going through this research just helped me realize this is a problem I actually care about. And I have some capabilities that I could lend into these spaces, which made the research like that much more fruitful to figure out how do we get the right thoughts around these spaces. This one I already shared 1.9 neurons die every minute. I definitely pulled this from Steve Bell. In an hour, that's the equivalent of 3.5 years of normal brain aging. So after experiencing the stroke and the blockage, if you're sitting there for an hour without that blockage being removed, that's accelerating your brain aging by 3.5 years was my understanding of that, which is just crazy. Now, some people can make a full recovery from a stroke depending on what region lost blood for how long, but a lot of people are permanently disabled after something like this. And that's, again, disproportionately affecting people in rural communities. Also, there are less than 1,000 interventional neuroradiologists, which are folks that are well qualified to go up that working channel and remove the clot. And they're typically centralized in larger urban areas. So if you have a stroke somewhere rural, it's very difficult to get proximal to the person who has what we would call the golden hands to actually be able to fix this situation mechanically. The average ischemic stroke patient generates $140,000 in lifetime medical costs. Think about physical therapy, any kind of rehabilitation, other impacts of this on their cognitive function. That's a huge economic burden. I've found 2 different numbers around this, but the US apparently spends like 100 billion on stroke and related job loss impacts. There's huge economic drivers to fix this problem. And then 6 million people worldwide die from stroke each year. And then 15 million strokes occur annually worldwide. So that means rough calculations like 40% of people who have a stroke die, which seems like a very high morbidity rate. And then only 2.8% of eligible stroke patients worldwide will have access to the care they need. So this is a critical gap in life savings treatment. Like just most people have a stroke and it's permanent disability or death sentence, depending on where they're at. So to continue to move forward in this, from the clinical unmet need, we'll start with just going through what the current standard of care is. This is probably informed mainly from a US context, but I assume it's similar in other parts of the world as well. My wife just texted me that I'm adorable and she loves me, so I don't know what I did. Oh, I wrote her a letter and she liked it. Okay, sorry, that was a quick tangent for the distraction. I'll turn my phone over. Okay, so current standard of care, and it's been out. It's been a crazy long day. So we're not going to talk about hemorrhagic strokes. I apologize for any medical language I get wrong. This is when you would have an aneurysm. Okay, so let's zoom in on, we'll call this person Steve. So if we zoom in on Steve really quick and we look at their brain's got kind of like 2 main lobes and a brain stem, and then there's some blood supply that goes up to here and here. You can have a part of the vessel wall can start to swell or get larger, and that is called an aneurysm. 40% positive on that aneurysm. And then if this ruptures, then you have blood pouring into the brain, and that's a problem. That can also cause damage. Not having blood to the brain is bad. Having too much blood in the brain is bad. For the sake of this discussion, I'm focusing mainly on the ischemic stroke because I understand this a little bit better. For a hemorrhagic stroke where it's bleeding into the brain, they have to get up through this working channel again, and they put a small coil of metal into that region, and that'll kind of stop the bleeding. Or they can put a stent there, and I think they leave it there for a bit to kind of open up and clot the wall. I don't know this area clinically as well. That's why I'm saying it's out of scope. I didn't study it as well. But that's another way that strokes occur. But for an ischemic stroke, a blood vessel in the brain gets blocked. It prevents downstream brain tissue from oxygenating through blood flow, and this leads to death or disability, which we've touched on. And now this will all be new content. So, your grandma is having some challenges. You notice she's not communicating the way she's intending to. Some tests you can do is like if something smells like burning toast, or if they can't roll their tongue back and forth. There's a few other checks you could do to see if somebody has a stroke. I don't know all of them. But basically, any shift in cognition, balance, movement, partial paralysis of the face. There's different symptoms that first responders and family members can use to quickly identify a stroke. And the speed of identification is so critical because as we go through this process, there are so many delays that just leads to more and more damage. Like it's painful to read how the process is, or at least for me. So first responder identifies symptoms of the stroke. They're then going to travel to their local ER for imaging to get a CT scan to confirm that it is an ischemic stroke that they can treat. And then from there, depending on like their background, they may prescribe a TPA, which is a tissue plasminogen activator, or this is a new one for me, tenecteplastine. Okay. Anyway, this is a pharmaceutical that can break down a clot. It's helpful in some cases. It has to typically be administered within 3 to 4.5 hours. It can still be effective within 24-hour windows, and its half-life or whatever is roughly between an hour and 2.5 hours. I'm not a doctor or a pharmacist, but in some cases, this can dissolve or break down the clot so that blood flow returns. But if you could mechanically get to that area and remove it faster, there's a huge improvement on the patient's like probability of regaining a normal pre-stroke level of function, depending on how quickly you can mechanically remove it versus trying to use drugs to dissolve it, which just aren't fast enough. But they do help if this could be administered at a local site of care that first discovers the problem where you scan it. So this isn't a bad thing, but it's not good enough, if that makes sense. But if a mechanical thrombectomy is deemed possible, the patient will be ambulanced, which is a word I think I made up, or helicoptered to the larger hospital for either a neurointerventional lab or a biplane IFR. This is all radiology lab. I definitely got this from Steve Bell. So basically, you have to go to a different facility with different technologies and different clinicians available in order to, again, work up this channel and actually intervene in these spaces. So then a catheter is going to be inserted in the groin artery, or there's a process that'll leverage the wrist to navigate to the brain using X-ray imaging and fluoroscopy. So they're basically using imagery to guide as they go. And then a stent retriever is used. They kind of push it through. Here, let me draw one really quick. So if we were zoomed in over here, you have a nice tube blockage. And then you have your catheter will have a working channel. And then through here, there will be a stent, that'll kind of stab through the clot. And then there's a mechanism that allows it to expand into like this fun geometry that expands along the walls. And then typically they'll open it and hold it for a little bit just to get some trickle of blood flow coming through back to the brain. And then after a certain amount of time, they'll retrieve the whole section. So they're either going to use a stent retriever to remove the blockage, or sometimes they'll use an aspiration catheter, which can suck it out, which is also kind of cool. So the big clinical need is if it takes, this is kind of like nominal worst case, if it takes 7.5 hours to change hospitals and complete a mechanical thrombectomy, the patient has lost 855 million neurons. And I don't even know what that correlates to from a percentage of the brain or anything like that, but this just seems incredibly severe and high risk. So the case study to kind of bring this home for me, not with my kids, but my parents live in rural Tennessee, and I recognize we may have a global audience. on this. So if I pull up a lovely map really quick, go to maps. Do, 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 do. Let's feel like it must be right in front of me.
Yeah, upper right.
Thank you. Dude, I'm so sleep deprived right now. But I was like, I have to do this. I've delayed this so many times. Um, thank you so much. All right, so let's get away from my house so that nobody knows where I live. So for anyone who doesn't know America, although I know you know it, Pinhao. Pinhao, is this okay? Like pacing, is this interesting? I don't know if you've even learned anything yet because you're already deep in the science.
Yeah,
But okay, cool. As long as you're geeking out to it and it's helpful, I'll keep it at the tempo. And let me know if you need me to speed up or slow down. So my family lives in Tennessee, right over here. I won't show exactly where they live, but basically there's this large city, Nashville, in central Tennessee, and they live, I'm gonna lie, so I'm gonna just because I don't they wouldn't want to know, have people know. Let's say they live out here by Glasgow. Okay, Glasgow is super rural, and they don't even live in Glasgow. They live like out in the outskirts over here. So they're 40 minutes from Glasgow. So my mom goes down, falls down the stairs, something's not right. My dad calls an ambulance. Ambulance takes 45 minutes to get her here, 45 minutes to go back over here. And then they go and get a CT scan, realize that it's a stroke, and they administer that drug, but it's not moving fast enough. And they realize she's a great case for a mechanical thrombectomy. She has to get helicoptered from Glasgow to Nashville or drive 2 hours down procedure. And every minute, like her brain is just going, right? So 1.5 hours to get diagnosed when she's at the ER. And then they contact the larger Nashville hospital, helicopter ride. I don't know how long these procedures take. So I just ballpark like 3.5 hours for draping anesthesia and an emergency surgery and coordinating all the logistics to get this off the ground. I'm sure they're trying to go fast, but it's just the reality of surgery. And then my mom or dad, if they survive, they will have to navigate a permanent disability for the remainder of their lives. Like all of these odds are terrible for me. So I just kind of sit in that reality. Like, again, this is a problem worth understanding and solving. So um, now we can start to get into some clinical unmet needs. I'm going to use standard biodesign language for the most part for this. But the first one is just a way to mechanically remove a blockage in the small vasculature of the brain in order to restore blood flow to the brain. And I would add to this some, if I add, I'm not going to edit it right now, but we would also probably want to say in rural communities as a piece of it. But there's some, oh, I get this actually. There's some nested needs under this. So a way to do this as quickly as possible to prevent permanent damage. So speed is a factor you'd want to add to that unmet need. Moving from local in-person surgery, which is only accessible in cities, to telesurgery to make situations like my parents more feasible. And this leads to a hub and spoke model where you have a wheel. For those who don't know hub and spoke, you have actually, I don't know oh yeah, I know the terminology. I had to think about wheel on a bicycle. You have a hub is in the middle, and then these are the spokes that kind of go out to the outer rim. If you think about this as Nashville, then all of these would be glass glow and local ERs. So the hub and spoke models, you would have your top clinicians here, and through telesurgery, they could still do procedures here with a support team that's localized into various communities, and that gets the economics working correctly. Other nested needs, expedited diagnosis. So increasing awareness, this could be app development, different ways to make sure stroke is identified as quickly as possible so that you don't lose time. Same with like a heart attack. If you don't detect and intervene as quickly as possible, it's very fatal. And then speed of reaching the optimal care facility, whether it's getting to the spoke, the outer spoke, or being able to discern quickly to go straight to the hub without all these stages and loops and delays. Other unmet needs we had is a way to limit an operator's exposure to radiation during navigation of a catheter to a stroke clot. This is an area that was of concern that I read from different unmet needs, but hospitals don't seem to care about it as much as they should. You- There's less of a healthcare economics driver because it's more of an occupational hazard. They should start to care about it. So being able to be away from the patient while you're leveraging a CT or X-rays to guide a catheter is ideal instead of having to physically maneuver a catheter under guidance and having consistent radiation exposure. And then a way to guide less experienced clinicians along the vasculature to the clot. So this is more of an AI solution to democratize them up the learning curve. So this is very technique driven. You want to make sure you don't damage any of the vasculature as you get up in there. And again, there's only 1,000 of these clinicians in the US. So how could you bring other clinicians up that curve quickly by giving them a roadmap? This is something we see a lot in Monarch. We'll take a detour because this is a fun surgical robotics tangent. So if I look up Monarch Surgical, are you familiar with Monarch and how? Have you seen this before? You're good.
I feel like I'm to it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Monarch, I had proximity to this platform when I worked at J&J. We acquired a company called Aura Surgical. And I mean, first of all, it's a beautiful robot. But this can work into the small airways of the lungs. And they'll take a CT scan. I think it's a CT or MRI. I always mix them up in my head. Pretty sure it's CT scan. And then they'll be able to get a whole map of the small airways and where they think there's a nodule they have to get to. And then the system will give them a guidance pathway. So they'll reconstruct it in 3D and it'll guide the clinician, even though they're the ones driving and steering this device into the small airways. By the way, this is just a fun nerd tangent. The reason that it has this joystick architecture is the first prototypes they controlled with an Xbox controller. That's what the engineers just got off the ground to control and steer it. And when they started getting to the point of figuring out what the user interface should start to feel like and started talking with surgeons, because I think the competitor Ion has like a roller ball, I believe, that they control. I'm not 100% sure of that, but they ended up just sticking with it because their KOLs or key opinion leaders liked it. And then they just made their own kind of controller. Yeah, I can get out into these really small airways. And then the guidance system is really clean. And then it takes a biopsy so you could do. But again, this is using AI to give them this overlay of the map they should follow. And if we could do the same thing for neurovascular robotics, that would be ideal as well, because there's all these different pathways you could take it. So how do you provide that feedback to clinicians? So that would democratize the learning curve.
So
Yeah,
is
go
there
ahead.
like a
One more
is there
time.
like live imaging of the lung, or is it a model that was built based on the CT or the MRI image?
Yeah,
Like a global view.
no, that's a beautiful question, and it leads into a whole bunch of challenges that platform has. So the image is not live. It is taken ahead of time, and then they construct a 3D render of it. So another company that does something similar to this is I'm gonna spell it wrong, but maybe I can find it. Biosoft Lung Software. Let me see. 12% probability I got the name right. Not confident. Nope, this is definitely not it. Shoot, what was it called? This is gonna bug me forever. Okay, so it's not Viasoft. Um, I can't remember the name. I'll just answer your question. So basically, they take the CT scans, they turn that into a 3D model. Let's go back to lung robot, and then they're able to create this map that you follow, which was right around here, I think. Let's see, too far. So go away.
So I guess
So
my
this is a live
next
camera
question
view.
would be like,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. I cut you off. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
I
Yeah.
was just gonna say like how are you gonna know like where like a live tracking of the tip position?
Yes. So the way that they do this, I'll walk you through it, loosely, is they take all these CT slices or of the lung, they build a model that they're kind of guiding the clinician through and they can see in real time. And then they have lots of left, right, up, down kind of pipes to choose between. And the software is able to know where the robot is based on just forward kinematics. Like it can project where it should be, inverse kinematics, forward kinematics. But then they have kind of tapping off they have to do inside of the first airways to calibrate the virtual model to the real lung tissue. And one of the issues with that calibration sequence, am I allowed to share this? I think I'm allowed to share this because clinicians complain about this
Oopsies.
publicly. No, no, no. No, it's okay. I always have to think like whenever this is a great question. Whenever I navigate questions around things I've worked on or been proximal to, I have to figure out how to frame it so that it's not trade secrety or things like that. You have something called biological drift. So if the lung tissue from the day of scanning is softer or different, or the airways are slightly longer or shorter because everything's flexing and moving, you can have your map dissident from reality, right? And that could be very dangerous. You could think you're in this module, but you're in the wrong one, and then you're biopsying a random wall, right? So when they're doing these cases manually, because I have observed a lot of manual bronchoscopy procedures where they're going down with a manual bronchoscope, which has a camera and a little needle working channel, they're at different points in the procedure, they will use like an X-ray, CT scan to make sure they're positioned the right way, but you're only getting like a top view or a side view, and then they have to guess and point. So there's always this weird dance between limited planes of imagery and determining where you are in 3D space. And this becomes incredibly technique dependent when it's manual for sure. But even robotically, the software can't always reconcile it perfectly. And it's really important because if you go through all the work to put someone under anesthesia and biopsy this, and you're just poking a random part of the lung because you're off by 2 millimeters, and then you give them the biopsy results that they don't have cancer and they do, and then that progresses for 3 to 6 months undetected, that leads down a path towards fatality. So the risks are really high of actually getting accurate biopsy and knowing exactly where you are in the lungs. Um, Another competitor to this is not moon surgical. Shoot, what are they called? I used to know the name of this one. Competitors with Monarch and Ion. Let's see. It's some space. It's Galaxy, I think. Interventional bronch. Noah Medical. There you go. I couldn't remember it. So I had a clinician that I was working with. I can't name him. He was a big advocate of Monarch, and then he had a lot of issues with that biological drift. And the Galaxy system integrates with different real-time optics to correct for that. So part of it is like being able to leverage the capital that exists in the OR. I was hoping to find something visual that would be more helpful than what this has. Being able to leverage capital that exists or integrating that capital into your capital. Like this is all ecosystem plays, which is incredibly challenging. How do you work with what visualization outputs already exist to build the model to then have your robot follow? But then how can you confirm that with imagery that does exist and kind of working across all those third-party softwares gets really dicey and tricky in these spaces. So it's like one of the most beautiful examples I have, we have to get back to neurovascular. Maybe we don't. Maybe this is what this session is supposed to be about. When I was in Japan, again, Xiasoft, I can't remember how to spell the name of that software. I have to look it up. It's a beautiful software where they can scan the whole lung, and then they can detect where the tumors are in the lung tissue. And let's see if I could draw a lung. I'm going to draw a really bad one. So here's your lung, and it's got kind of like one side's got two flaps and one's got one flap, I think. I'm not a surgeon, okay? So part of this is wrong. But there's different lobes of the lung. Maybe one has three lobes and one has two. We'll just put maybe here. I'm not a doctor, okay? But depending on where you have a tumor in the lung, you could do various things. You could do a full lobectomy where you cut everything off, and that reduces your breathing capacity by like 50%, right? That would be pretty severe. You can do a wedge resection where you take a large chunk out of the lung, but that's also taking more lung out. Or what's more challenging and what I saw some clinicians do in Japan is it's called a segmentectomy. And they try to take the smallest segment possible, segmentectomy. They try to take the smallest segment possible so that you have the maximum air capacity. And they want to get, it's hard. They want to get really tight margin around the tumor, but they also want to get enough around it that they know that nothing's seeded, that they didn't leave any cancerous tissue in the lung. And there's this awesome software that could take the whole CT scan, and then it would light up different segments of the lung, different colors to kind of show them you want to do a segmentectomy on section 13 and section 12. These are all clinically labeled. I don't know them. And then it would show like what vasculature they have to cut off blood flow to, what lymph nodes they're going to take down around it. Like they could plan the whole thing ahead of time, which was beautiful. This is a third-party software. No, 1 second. Something's going wrong on school. You good on school? Let me try to refresh something. Ping, how you still there? You still there, Ping Hao? Can you hear me? Sorry, it
Yeah.
freaked out on my computer. It said refresh or it'll go. But the system would give them great visuals on what they should take down.
Oh, by the way, you're not
Oh, yeah,
screen
yeah.
sharing.
Thank you. Let me bring it back. This session's for you, friend. So it'll go wherever you want to take it. All right. So they'll basically take these different sections. But when I saw the procedure, all this would be considered pre-operative planning. All this beautiful pre-operative planning, right? To create this great plan.
So usually,
Yeah. Go ahead.
usually how advanced, like how many days before is this pre-op planning happen?
It depends. Sometimes it can be literally just a couple days beforehand. Not the day of normally, for the CT scan because they have to coordinate and then they have to get approval and then the doctors have to review it and then they have to determine what kind of surgery will come from it. So again, with that body drift that we're talking about, things can change over the course of a week or multiple weeks, which is one of the challenges with it. But the unmet need I saw from this procedure, sorry, because I'm going to lose it, and this is the main point. But you could throw more questions at me. Is you have this beautiful preoperative planning, but then once you get into the intraoperative space, like the procedure's happening robotically, he's doing a robotic segmentectomy, very precise technique. He would be in the robot, focus, and then he would have to cognitively remember the map. And if something from the biology he was seeing didn't match his memory, he would have to pull out of the console, everything pauses, and he had to walk all the way across the room to a different screen that had all this stuff rigged up so that he could see and turn the model around, maybe talk to another surgeon of like, all right, this is where I think we are, this is what we have to do. And he'd walk back to the seat, lock back in, And I remember looking at this, and this is, free for intuitive folks. Like, why the heck can't he just have a beautiful little 3D model in the corner of his screen that he could turn on and off and twist that mapped the geometry of what he's really seeing with what was preoperative planning so that he doesn't have to leave leave the surgical field. But because you have so many different hardware and software players and everyone hasn't acquired everyone, and you don't have these beautiful APIs between these systems, you have weird compromising behaviors that clinicians have to navigate to get the best preoperative planning with the best intraoperative robot. For this individual, it was intuitive. It was an XI system, or if he wants the best stapler, he might still be really passionate about leveraging an Ethicon endo cutter because he used that for a decade before ever moving to intuitive, and he still doesn't trust their endo wrist for some reason. You have all these strange hoops clinicians have to jump through to provide the optimal care to patients because the technology ecosystems aren't holistically designed with them in mind. You have segments of those ecosystems designed. And I think the future is really winning the full ecosystems, like figuring out which pieces you pull together. And this is all through mergers and acquisitions, really, or figuring out where there's white space from an intellectual property perspective to make your own digital solutions on your own hardware. So that's why you see Johnson & Johnson's going after robotics, Stryker's in robotics, Zimmer's in robotics in the orthopedic spaces. There's large, huge players in different pockets of robotics that are also pulling in digital ecosystems and trying to span farther from the preoperative into the intraoperative and into the postoperative surveillance. And then you have to get the whole
I know it makes
value
sense
going.
that everyone
Yeah. Go ahead.
I know everyone wants to get the whole pie, right? But then,
Yeah.
like, it would be nice if there's something like you mentioned, like an API or some kind of protocol that
Mhm.
can share data between different providers or different companies, and you get the best out of everyone.
Yeah. Well, and clinicians would love that. And there's certain companies that do have more open architecture. Orthopedics is a good example, and for some reason, I won't be able to remember the names of these companies. Back when I was looking at Zimmer, there are certain robots that can only position if it's like an orthopedic knee robot, you could only use a Zimmer um, knee replacement with the Zimmer robot to position it. Or if you're using,
Is it the Rosa?
yeah, Rosa. Yeah, thank you, the Rosa robot. But then there are other platforms that are going to allow a clinician to pick which implant they want with their robot. Like it's an open architecture because some clinicians think a knee from Zimmer is better on some days, a knee from Stryker is better on another day, depending on how they need to get the alignment right. I'm not deep on orthopedics yet. So the market does want open architectures, both from a hardware and a digital solution perspective. It's getting the incentives right for because we're capitalists, right? We're getting incentives right for the people making it. Because if you give an open API, then you're giving away sometimes like the secret sauce and everything you built, and then people can just tap in and leverage it without potentially paying for it. You have to get the payer access to that integration to make sense. That's why you'll sometimes see licensing deals and collaborative deals between different hardware and software companies in surgery so that they shake hands so that you only have access to this specific software through this gateway of hardware. Um, it's very convoluted. But yeah, this is my like I would say one of the most painful unmet needs I saw of just seeing how technically simple it would be to create a 3D render in this screen, but recognizing from a political perspective, a licensing perspective, a mergers and acquisition perspective, or internal development to basically copy that software onto their platform and navigate IP, which they probably have the legal team and the engineers to figure it out. Like the delay between this actually becoming a reality in that market in Japan was going to be so severe from the simplicity of what I saw as an engineer. Like, this is completely feasible technically, but it's the political innovation landscape that blocks a clinician from having access. This is also why you'll see sometimes surgeons will have, if they're using an intuitive system, they'll have multiple energy pedals beyond the intuitive system because they also want to use an FT10 generator with certain devices. And like, they don't want to use Intuitive's tower all the time. There's a lot of strangeness that occurs the more proximal you are to clinicians because they're working with suboptimal technical ecosystems or technology ecosystems. Does that make sense? So this is okay, fun detour. Now let's see if we could find our way back to neurovascular robotics. This is fantastic. Okay. Okay, so a way to guide less experienced clinicians along the vasculature, democratize them up the learning curve. So this is a common unmet need, not only in neurological robotics, but in soft tissue robotics, orthopedic robotics. You have the Monogram platform for knee is looking towards fully AI, autonomous knee surgery. Like, everything's trying to guide clinicians and then eventually do the work is kind of the master plan with all this tech, right? So technical feasibility, I will, in transparency, say I wish I spent more time on this section. This is just kind of some things I heard from videos, and we could talk through it loosely. So one of the main challenges is using a guide wire and position it into the working channel to the blood clot, and then you bring the catheter along the guide wire. And there are various methodologies to position this wire: electrostatics, which I looked up, but I don't know much about that; mechanically feeding or pushing it and twisting it around corners, which there's some artistry and technique driven in that. And then also using magnetic fields to pull and bend it, which I'm not sure if you've seen any of that kind of tech, which is kind of cool. And then navigating these catheters, neurovascular catheters, in a 1 to 3 millimeter channel for up to 2 meters is like pushing a very long, thin rope. So it's very challenging from a material properties perspective to actually create the right level of flexibility and rigidity to be able to navigate that without damaging the vasculature and to get that far. This is an area where I don't have expertise. Apparently, nitinol is something I heard a lot for like memory tip alloys. Again, this is outside of my domain, but there's challenges there. Source 3 has some deep context on that. I think I put this is a source out of Steve that he quoted. This is like an hour-long video just on the fundamentals of designing a guide wire and all the material property selection. I didn't have time to go that deep on it, but if you want to nerd out on it, it'll be there. And then nitronol. Criticality of physical AI and having the right data infrastructure. So one of the first goals is to be able to position a robot that you can deploy in the field, but you want to make sure that you build it with the right data infrastructure in mind so that you can actually start to measure 7 degrees of freedom worth of forces and get the real-time navigation so that you can start to position the stent more and more accurately and start to get that controls loop optimized. So to get that data in real time is ideal, and that way the system can continue to adapt and get better. So that's one piece that's going to be important in the future. You're seeing a lot of robotics companies are leading with a strong digital data architecture strategy to make sure that they can get that data from the field as quickly as possible and then pivot. Yeah, go ahead.
Just curious, what's the seventh degree of freedom? So I know XYZ linear, right? And then roll pitch yaw, like the rotational. What's the seventh?
Roll pitch yaw. What is the seventh?
Oh.
Why did I come up with that? 7 DOF is common. No, that's fine. Like, that's a good
Is it
check.
lobby count?
No, it's a good check on theoretical mechanics. So, shoot, because a lot of normal surgical robotics systems are 7 DOF. So you have your X, Y, Z, your wrist. Maybe I'm imagining another wrist. This might not, 7 DOF might not be correct. I'll start with saying that. So I think I just pulled that off of intuition from normal laparoscopic surgical devices are typically 7 DOF. But in a catheter, I don't know. That's a good call out that I have to think more about. So I actually don't know how many degrees of
Maybe
freedom
it's
are in
just
a catheter. Because insertion would still just be
I
your
think
Z, your Z. So that's not the one.
right. I think it's usually like for robots or like joint robots are
Yeah.
like you said, there's 7 joints, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But maybe I was thinking like a different coordinate frame, like not in
No,
the joint frame, but
like you are
partition,
a
whatever.
master's going on PhD in mechanical, so you outrank me. So if you saw that and you're like, that's wrong, I'm like, it could probably be wrong, actually.
No, I'm just curious.
No, you're good.
Yeah, because I work with and I only have like 6 rows of data. So I'm like, wait, am I missing one?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that this is maybe wrong. So that's a good call out. And if not, we could figure out what that mystery DOF is in the future when we start working on one of these together. And then eventually we're going to start to move towards autonomous navigation of vasculature, where you position it inside the femoral artery and you click a button and it has the right preoperative scanning, the right physical map, and the right checkpoints of other control of systems to test or measure as it goes to make sure it just gets to the clot. And then the clinician will make a decision. Like that's kind of the end game in some ways of this space. Um, Naturally, from a risk perspective, you'll have a clinician in the loop in the beginning, but I actually see a lot of surgery going this way, where first the surgeon will be moving an intuitive, and then eventually the intuitive system will be like, we see that this is a vascular system that you want to transect. For instance, if you're back in like soft tissue robotics, do you consent? Surgeon says yes, the system will move, close, and fire, right? Like eventually it's going to get towards steps and having the clinician confirm. And then eventually the system will just have all the data it needs to just do it. But training that, improving that, and navigating the risks and who's liable is really complicated. So depending on what surgeon or engineer you talk to, this is 3 years away if you're Elon Musk. This is 20, 50 years away if you're a hardline surgeon that thinks it'll never be there. Right? So there's a big spread there. But I think this is an area where we're going to live in the tension of this. I'm more forward leaning, but I think we'll be there faster than a lot of people think. But then commercializing it is a whole nother game. Okay. And then this is just a learning. I did systems engineering. I did a lot of risks and requirement cascades. This is an area where I think requirement cascade is critical because there are so many different technical pathways and architectures that you need to constrain. You have to figure out exactly how you intend to get from A to B, what's clinically relevant, what's valuable, what the cogs can cost, and how that constrains different mechanism design. And when we start to look through some of the competitive analysis, it's so varied company by company, the way that they're solving this problem, which is really interesting. It's a beautiful, interesting design space. But if your requirement cascade is too loose, then I think there's too many different ways you can go. And it can cause you to get outside of the innovation trifecta, where you could start to find yourself in some corner you didn't intend to put yourself in, where maybe it's no longer commercially viable because the majority of the cost is not in the disposable piece, or the capital should have the most cost, but you put a lot of the expense into something you're throwing away each time. This became a problem with the Monarch platform. Like it's not always profitable to do a surgery because it's just so expensive to throw away. So figuring out how to stay in the middle is really important from a requirements perspective.
But then don't
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
want to have a model where you can bill it to the insurance or the patient?
Yeah, you definitely want to bill it to the insurance and the patient long term. But how do I provide context? That's a beautiful question. It's a hard question. So and so when this is like a history lesson. So when intuitive started to get traction for doing surgery, reimbursement didn't exist for robotic surgery. So if you wanted to get a robotic colon resection, that hit the hospital and it potentially hit the patient disproportionately. But because the demand started to grow, A lot of times hospitals would still provide robotic surgery options, even if it wasn't economical. Like they would lose money in those procedures, but it was driving traffic to the institutions. And the reason that occurred was because initially there wasn't clinical evidence that showed that robotic surgery had any improved clinical outcome to a traditional handheld laparoscopic surgery. And in fact, a lot of laparoscopic surgical companies like Ethicon, where I worked, because we made staplers and energy devices, lobbied and did tons of clinical documentation to just prove that robotics wasn't superior, which was looking back really stupid. But at the time, they were trying to protect their base business and they thought it was like a fad. It would never go to that point. And then they ended up entering the robotic space through Otava, which is what I worked on. And we actually had the opportunity to buy Intuitive at one point and we passed, which was really, really dumb as well. And I want to know who was in that room because that was a huge mistake. But because Intuitive's like a massive, massive company now. And the challenge with it was they had to continue to get the data to demonstrate the clinical superiority of it, to then be able to get an enhanced reimbursement so that you could have a more expensive surgery, but it was robotic so that it was covered. So in Japan recently, actually while I was out there in 2024, they had finally gathered enough data to provide enhanced reimbursement. I think I'm going to mix this up. So anyone quoting me, this is possibly wrong. Like they unlocked the clinical value of thoracic cancer robotically or liver resection robotically. I forgot which disease states that reimbursement opened up to, but our Ethicon team had a lot of concern naturally, and I'm sure so did Medtronic before Hugo was deployed, that this was going to take a lot of share from laparoscopic surgery because now you're going to have all these clinicians that we'll say are thoracic surgeons that can now start doing robotic surgery because they can actually get reimbursed for those procedures. Otherwise, the hospitals are just losing money doing it, but they're doing it because of the consumer demand. And then that cost falls on the hospital and it falls on the patient until the reimbursements build. So this is one of the main challenges that neurovascular robotics is going to happen. It's like the first to market that's commercialized is going to have to show why this platform is clinically superior to just physically shoving a catheter up someone's leg. Like what clinical outcomes are you getting that are better because you have this robot? And it may be difficult to prove even if it's only localized surgery. I'm not sure if localized robotic thrombectomy is going to be proven to be clinically superior than going in mechanically. You might be able to look at time. Typically, robotics is slower than manual. So I'm waiting to be pleasantly surprised if this is faster because time is brain cells in stroke. So that would be one area where you could prove it's better, but maybe it's worse. But the only way that I see you getting a premium reimbursement is being able to do it remotely because that's dramatically improving patient outcomes for people in those areas. So then you would want to provide full reimbursement, which would then open up the market. That opens up the TAM. Whereas these companies have to progress at risk that they'll make a solution that is clinically relevant and provides value, but they can't be paid for it from a commercial perspective. So that'll really hurt sales and it hurts hospitals in the beginning. But that's always something that happens when you're working on the. Do you know the curve of adoption? Have you heard of this?
Or what?
This is awesome. So you have this normal distribution. I'm going to make these sections up, but you have like, it's called the chasm. It's all dark. So in this section, I'm going to make these terms up. This is like the tech nerds. They're really excited. These are your early adopters. And then this is wrong, by the way. I made that one up. This is called the early majority. This is probably the most important thing you're going to learn from this entire session today. This is the late majority. And then this is the laggard. So whenever you deploy a new technology into the market, you're naturally going to get these early adopters. And again, this is a small percentage of people. Think like Google Glass and people that thought that was going to be the greatest thing on earth. And it took another decade before Apple Vision, which still hasn't really been adopted. And then early adopters is a slightly larger market. And these two groups are going to really be pushing for people to use your technology. They believe in it. We would call them in our market like KOLs or key opinion leaders. And the whole goal is this is called the chasm. It has an H in it. Sorry. I think it has an H in it. Chasm. And the chasm is where many products go to die. Like if you can't jump the chasm into early majority, you have, if you get stuck here, this is like no TAM, total addressable market. You never get to the market, which is right here. So the risk of progressing a new technology like neurovascular robotics is you could go through all the work to have a strong clinical unmet need. You could demonstrate technical feasibility. You can protect your ability to practice that technical feasibility with IP, and you can go to commercialize. And because there's no reimbursement structure, you can hit a chasm. You clinicians and hospitals just can't afford to leverage your tech because they can't get the right insurance reimbursement back. So like at Johnson & Johnson, whenever we make a new product, we have a whole regulatory and healthcare economics team that's constantly evaluating different opportunities to see, is there an efficient pathway to have clarity on what we could charge for this device when we commercialize it and have it be reimbursed so that hospitals and clinicians actually adopt it. Because we could charge whatever we want, but they're not going to buy it if they can't get that reimbursement from insurance. Someone has to eat that cost. They might buy it in a clinical setting or really progressive surgeons or pockets, but you won't get the full, this is full TAM. Full TAM is over here. This is like what J&J likes this. This makes us happy. So that's why often Johnson & Johnson will acquire a medtech company later for way more money because they've already made it through regulatory. They've made it into the commercial market and they've demonstrated that they can jump the chasm. Like there's a large enough market with reimbursement, and then they'll acquire it and scale it like crazy. That's why you see these super acquisitions in the hundreds of millions and billions. That's the game that J&J plays. Whereas startup land's very different. You have to chew on glass and look into the abyss and hope that you could figure out the reimbursement because it doesn't exist yet. So that's the curve of adoption. I hope that's a helpful tangent. Passing that one on. This is like marketing, passing some marketing on to a PhD engineer. It'll make you dangerous, my friend. All right, let's keep rolling. So we'll get into commercial viability. It's kind of the last chapter here. And I will say for commercial viability, I have some gaps in my know-how. I wish I could put more time into this. So this is just like some quick Google hunting with these numbers. So TAM, which is your theoretical addressable market, this is just for neurovascular devices, not even robotics. So existing catheter solutions. And then this is a foundation for robotics to kind of grow on top of, assuming we can get that reimbursement. So the real number is much higher than this, is what I'm saying. But for just neurovascular devices, it's around 77 billion by 2023 with a high growth rate, CAGR 9.3%. Like a CAGR over 3 to 4 is really good. So this is a high growth area where you're seeing a lot of innovation, a lot of commercial opportunity to develop solutions here. So that's why this market's going to get saturated pretty quick, because it's technically feasible, it's an unmet need, and there is a strong confidence from the market and investors that there will be the ability to get these solutions commercialized and reimbursed. So that's why it's centered in the innovation trifecta. Other commercial viability notes, the hub and spoke model that we're talking about requires large contract selling across hospital networks and complex upskilling for local telesurgical teams. So just because you can develop a solution, actually being able to sell it across all these stakeholders is incredibly challenging. And the learning, the upskilling is a huge part. This is called Prof Ed. So campaigning the Prof Ed plan to figure out who's the right clinicians that will be doing these new procedures on the front lines of stroke with teams back at the hub Like that whole model is not built yet. So you have to build out that change in care, like the change in standard of care for it to actually scale. So that puts a lot of pressure because if you have, let's say, $1 million robot, that's $1 million hit from capital on the hospital network. And do you even have a local team ready to use that robot? And the answer is probably no. So there's a lot of training necessary for adoption of the technology on the front lines. And that's why you need a large hospital network with regional centers and main hubs to say like, okay, let's say this is what we're going to be able to provide that other hospital networks can't. They're going to invest in the robot, they're going to invest in the upskilling and the training, and they're going to scale it, and then it'll tip. But finding the first one is really hard, and then the second one, right? So to scale that market to release that full TAM is challenging. Well, we just talked about this. Reimbursement pathway is still to be determined to make the healthcare economics make sense, because I anticipate a robotic neurovascular surgery will cost more than a handheld neurovascular surgery, is at least my guess. And that's also how you measure costs, though. I believe like the total cost for the device and what's disposable and what the capital costs will be higher. But if you think about the healthcare economic burden of somebody getting treated 2 hours later because it was manual and they couldn't get to the right location, that economics justifies the increased cost. But you have to prove that to get that, if that makes sense. So this is just like speaking of today. And then there's no mass production or commercialization occurring right now. I think there's only 2 companies that have like gotten under contract with hospitals that have cleared 510(k). And then the majority of these have both capital and disposable. So this is the razor blade model, which is really common. You pay for the razor and then you buy that razor once, but then you're always buying the razor blades. And often those make much higher revenue. Like the margins are higher on the razor blades than the actual razor itself. So this would be instruments that you have to throw out because they're contaminated with a patient's blood, or they're reusable 5 to 20 times until the working channels no longer have the right rigidity to be used again. So you have to dispose of them. So you'll get money off of both the razor and the blades. Now, what's interesting, there are certain solutions, I think XCath is one of these, where they actually are an open platform, which means they're only selling the razor. They're only selling the capital, and then you can use any catheter you want with it, just like we talked about with orthopedics. This is a very competitive play to try to take the market and win on capital, but then it's hard to sustain because you don't have the razor blade for consistent revenue. You're always trying to position capital. And what happens when you position it across all the hospitals, or you get saturated, then you have to go towards different digital memberships or pay to use the platform kind of models. So that's also challenging. So every business will have a different means of making revenue, whether it's capital and disposable or pure capital. And then just another driver, stroke is the leading cause of disability in the US. They spend around $56 billion on stroke care. This is just for care, not also job loss. I think earlier I wrote $100 billion. And then this map just kind of shows the treatable market, right? So drugs can't dissolve large clots. You have 90,000 strokes in the US per year. And then 775 are those ischemic ones with the blood clot. And then of those, about half are the large occlusions that you can't solve with the drug. And then I don't know what salvageable tissue means, but then only 40K can be treated. I actually got this from a presentation you shared with me. There's for the ARPA, this diagram popped up, which was really helpful. So thank you for that. Cool. So that's everything I had on clinical unmet need, commercial viability. I was going to talk through the 2 communities I have quickly, just because I know there's some people that might want to join a community. And then we could do a little bit of competitive landscape, unless this is too dense for you to go through that as well. So I'll take pause if you have any questions or thoughts, depending how. Otherwise, I could do a mini tour of what I do on school and then jump back through it.
I was gonna say I put this in the comments, but like
Oh,
according
so,
to your this early adopter curve over, right?
yeah,
So you said there's only 1,000 of them, and according to this curve, we need to be like on the left
yeah,
side, right? So
yeah.
we only need 16% of them. So we just need 160 of them to be on board.
No, that's a really good way to look at it. Yeah, and so much work from a marketing perspective goes into identifying who those early adopters should be and who holds the most influence. So during my time in Japan, I spent a lot of time connecting with folks that are just at the pinnacle of surgery. Like when they adopt a given procedure or approach, it cascades. So if they're using a certain device a certain way, it just cascades in the market. And those people have the power to push across the chasm. So you are right. It's 160 of those surgeon or clinicians. Those are interventional neurologists, I think is the right word. Um, but the challenge is that the decision making of approaching the procedures this way with this level of capital investment causes you to bring a lot more people to the table before a point of purchase can be made. You have to get buy-in from the hospital networks. There are like value review boards that occur. So you have to show the business value of this investment. You have to show from like a litigation perspective how this can potentially protect them from malpractice lawsuits, how this differentiates their hospital network against other competition to be able to offer this service and this technology. And then you also have the local team that also has to upskill in order to be able to leverage this technology. So it's more than the 160 to cross it because the decision is matrix, like spread across matrixed organizations. Whereas in the past with just laparoscopic surgery, we could sell directly to a surgeon because they like our stapler more than a competitor stapler. When you're working with robotic ecosystems, it's way more complex and the lead times to get to the point of decision and sale are much more challenging. And for startups, that means your cash flow and revenue gets pushed farther out. So the investment community has to continue to fund you at a much higher level to be able to get to the point where you see the ROI is always farther out in surgical robotics than some kind of handheld med device, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I feel like the way that we are talking right now, like with all this like all the approval and stuff is for hospital that already has the expert doing the surgery,
Mhm.
right? And like when you first started this whole project, we are talking about rural that has none, like zero.
Yeah.
And it's either zero or one, or
Yeah.
like it's not like one to like 100 or whatever, like right. I don't know. I just feel like why would someone want to block it? But I guess it's just like the naive
Oh,
me, you
like
know.
why would somebody block the adoption of the technology? Is that what you
I
mean?
Yeah,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's a beautiful question. It's a hard question. I don't think anybody wants to block it. I think that there are natural and I guess this is I have a lot of experience in like politics within industry and it spills over into healthcare economics as well. It's not blocking, I think a lot of times getting alignment and driving to a point of decision is really challenging when you're working across so many different people. And if you imagine it from a hospital network's perspective, they're also trying to discern like which horse to bet on. Like, is XCath really the company that we want to trust for a 5 to 10 year capital investment? Or should we be waiting for the endovascular robot that's coming out from Siemens Health Engineers and their collaboration with Stryker? Because we've been doing work with Stryker. So you also have brand affinity and trust on like, are we trusting this startup that's trying to position in their first system? Because what if you pay $1 million for it and then the company caves after 2 years because they can't navigate a series C or D funding round to continue to like maintain the robot and learn? So, because they're gonna have multiple choices between different companies to solve this problem, that also complicates decision making. And I've even seen that talking with surgeons in Japan that are like, "Yeah, we are still waiting for Otava." even though the Hinatoli robot's available from Japan, Intuitive's got a new robot rolling out. Medtronic just launched Hugo Raz in Japan. They're like, we're still going to wait for Johnson and Johnson's because they love our instrumentation. They believe in the value of what we're building towards. But there's other surgeons that haven't waited and they jump to another one. It's just the perception of quality and the confidence of the platform. And that clinician has to hold an entire organization at bay for multiple years of delays to say, not this robot that just came out. We have to hold for this other one. That also becomes complex from a sales landscape perspective. So the more players that are in it, folks recognize they won't all succeed. It's the hard part. Like a lot of these companies will die at some point. And the impact of that on the hospital network is huge because if you can't get instruments for the robot you bought, that's just a sunk 1.2 million or whatever that you don't get back. So that's why there's so much scrutiny over who you move forward with. Because adoption of anything new is kind of tricky. Does that make sense? So it's not, I do want to push on the simplicity of it's just 160 people you have to convert to like make this a blockbuster solution. I think it will be even more challenging than the commercial side of development versus the traditional R&D and getting to the point of a robot you could actually mass produce. It's really positioning and maintaining the systems. That's where a lot of the real work begins. I'll pause if that's helpful. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. So we'll do a little mini pitch. I'll just share some of the stuff that I'm trying to do with my school communities, and then we'll hop into the competitive landscape. Oh, wow. Why did it do that? I hate that. I folded my tabs together. So I have two communities on school. You've been part of the MedTech one, which is awesome. I'll show you the other one first then. And there'll be a link in that document how to get to either. So I have something called the Big Brain Club that I founded 2 years ago almost. Let me go right over here. And in this group, I'm focused on helping people who are navigating the lack of definition in their journey. It's a bit disorienting or isolating. They don't have people around them that have seen the same level of success they aspire to. And I'm helping them build the lives they desire, living where they want, loving what they do, being paid well for it. I provide a common methodology or assessment to kind of baseline where they're at. And then I support them on the journey of actually moving forward. And then I help left brains like engineers and global leaders. Right brains are creatives and community builders, and whole brains are parents or entrepreneurs. And we have this community where folks will share this Find Your Next assessment state, like where they started in their journey. Man, it's working really hard. Like where they started in their journey. And then they'll share where they are today, what their desired future state is, why they want this change in their life, and what they're afraid of. And then their assessment. And then this becomes a change log they can use to track their progress over time. And I got 250 weird, cool brains in this space. I also do weekly office hour calls for folks that are in my paid group. So I also have like a paid membership for this. So I've been helping somebody start a new monetized community. He's a VR developer called Full Dive Ronin, which has been really fun. And this is something I've been building out for quite some time. So that's the Big Brain Club. And then the other group is the MedTech community that you're part of, How. And my goal with this group is to eventually circle around different unmet needs in different clinical spaces and come up with more opportunities for developing technologies that cure different unmet needs and creating greater partnership across different industry folks, because a lot of times we get siloed if we're in a company with what we can and can't share. And I'm trying to break through a lot of those silos and create greater proximity between clinicians, R&D folks, commercial partners. And then my plan for monetizing this community, let me see if I can pull this up really quick. This is the long-term strategy. We'll see how we get there. Plans. Don't worry about this one. I do stealth mode consulting around clinical unmet need, technical feasibility, and commercial viability. So this is if I'm like working with different consultants or clients. But then for free groups, like they can just geek out, connect, and do friendship. And then long term, I'm going to have these brainstorming Q and A's, part of a monthly subscription. And then this group can pick what clinical specialty to research next. I'll research everything. I'll perform a mini keynote, and then we can collaboratively partner across these silos. And then folks in premium will get access to all the calls that are recorded, all of the notes that I'm working through, and then eventually there'll be a huge portfolio of these on different clinical specialties, different technologies, or companies, depending on what this group wants to know and research. So I'm actually really challenged by this model. I think it's fun, and it's worth putting effort into, and it stretches me. So that's eventually going to be the goal of monetizing the medtech community. Um, but for now, it's just me and you hanging out on a call. So that is what I'm building towards. Okay, and then let's just jump into competitive landscape. So, XCath for me is probably the most interesting company. There's, I think, 6 I have thus far. I'm going to add some more after the session that I have from another notes from some friends that I'll work through. And then I have all of the main links to each of these companies. What I like about XCath, they're trying to bring precision that the very top neurointerventionalists have, and seeing them work is obviously art, but bringing that and standardizing that. So they're trying to bring everyone up the learning curve so that they're all top tier through advances in robotic surgery in these spaces. I really like the CEO of this company because he's also the CEO of EndoQuest, and he just seems to have really strong command over the technology and deploying it efficiently. They've done their first in human in Panama, November 25th, which is pretty cool. And then, as I shared earlier, they're using just a razor model. So they have an open architecture that works with off the shelf catheters, which I think differentiates them a bit in the market, which is kind of cool. And then Microbot, the Liberty system's really interesting. I don't know. I think you shared a link to this, and someone else shared something with me as well. But let me pull them up really quick. They're definitely worth looking at. Tab. Okay. So their system, go away. So they had this borderline crazy vision of a robot that was disposable. So, yeah, there it is. So this is a little catheter robot that you just plug in here, and you can control it remotely away from the radiation. I think they had a video of it. Here we go. This is awesome. I was very surprised by this design. Let's see. Show me the robot. Say you would just install this over here. This is your control deck, basically. It's the world's first fully disposable endovascular robot. 510K clearance already. They have one partnership with the hospital, so they're getting some sales. It's super small, and it eliminates complexity. Like, you just bring this thing in, plug your stuff into it, throw it away, even though it's probably still wicked expensive. But they found a way to get the price point right where you can just toss this as opposed to this being reusable. And it's designed to use off the shelf instruments just like XCath. So very interesting design. I was quite curious about this because it's so small, which is interesting. So that's XCath, or sorry, no, that's not XCath. That's Microbot Medical with the Liberty system.
Problem they're trying to solve just to reduce exposure to radiation.
Yep, that was one of the main goals they had on their documentation. Oh, It's right there. Reduce exposure to radiation with a little stuff. That is something that clinicians care about, and hospital networks are going to have more pressure to care about, but they might not care about it enough that the economics work necessarily. I don't know the price point of this robot, um, but it's very curious. So that's the main, yeah, it eliminates physical strain. They don't have to be twisted over and controlling it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So again, this is where requirements are so important because someone's requirement cascade on the user needs and the commercial needs led to this architecture, which is probably far different than whatever XCath is putting out versus other competitors. Or there's the Corindus acquisition that Siemens made as well. That's kind of in their space as well. So everyone has a different approach to whether this capital or this is a 100% disposable robotic device. So they probably have to be very efficient with what motors they have in here and what torque they deliver and how much they weigh and cost for this to be justified. And there's probably features they don't have because of this architecture concerning access or how they guide the guide wire. Because there are other companies that I haven't thrown on here yet, like that's Magnendo. Let me see, I had it on another side. Yeah, Magneto. They have a like fully guided system. Here it is. So they're actually guiding the catheter. Oops. I think they show it. Maybe they just talk about why it's so important. Yep. So this is all guided with magnet. So this architecture is going to allow you to position a guide wire with probably better accuracy than whatever that Liberty system does. Potentially, right? There's different architectures on how you guide the guide wire and how intrusive that capital solution has to be. But that Liberty architecture was optimal for how they're trying to segment the market and which problems they solve and don't solve. And that's the beautiful plight of an engineer. Is we have to work across all those different constraints. So let me see other one. Remedy Robotics, flawless immediate cardiovascular intervention for every patient everywhere. So they're pushing hard on remote surgery for multiple diseases. I think they've also demonstrated successful surgery. Click on them really quick. I don't know if they had any videos. No, they were just talking about their vision. Oh yeah, so they've been proving like the distance. So there's a lot of these companies have a novelty of proving how far across the world they can do a procedure. So they do seem to be caught up in that hype a little bit, which is still impressive to do this technically. Whereas I would rather see first remote neurointerventional procedures with clinician in a separate hospital to the patient. And then they're heading for clinical trial. Like accelerating to the clinical trial is the most important thing versus how far away can you do it from. Because I don't like from a payer perspective, it's not going to make sense to have someone in Switzerland performing on someone in like Arizona. So the distance doesn't need to be transatlantic to show value necessarily. For most hub and spoke cases, that's what I think would be likely. And then we have imperative care. Oh, this is one where they have a really nice catheter system. Imperative care. But they've declared they're going after robotics, but we know nothing about it. She had a great story. I love watching videos from these companies of just showing real patients and what they've navigated. But they have a nice tube and tube design. They use aspiration to suck the clot out instead of a stint. And then they said they are actively working on a robotics platform. They're developing a telerobotics platform to expand, but we don't know what that looks like, and it's not available to buy naturally. And then Siemens is interesting because they acquired the Corindus robot and they're trying to reimagine that so that's more valuable. And then they teamed up with Stryker. So they're leveraging the best of their hardware and software expertise in these spaces. So whatever they put out will probably be very compelling. Like these are two large strategics partnering together in these spaces, going up against a standalone startup. Like that's always interesting to see. XCath will probably be faster than something that's coming out of strategics working together, but who knows? And then ARPA H was interesting because Intuitive came out of DARPA funding from the government. So this is an initiative to look at different life-saving interventions that are all autonomously. So that's what the government's funding is work towards autonomous solutions, and neurovascular is part of that. And then I'll add more after the session. But yeah, that's all I got, friend. Here, I'll kill the screen for a second. Bring you over if you had any lingering questions or thoughts. Let me know. Hope it was deep and interesting.
Yeah, not really. I guess I already asked my questions during your presentation.
Yeah, no, excellent. And yeah, I'm excited to do this in the future. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, the ARPA-H website, they have like a teaming profile, and there's a whole list of people.
Mhm.
They have some of their expertise in some areas, and they're looking for some other people. And I think XCAP is in there.
Yeah.
So there might be some other interesting companies that are trying to get into this area that's on the list,
Yeah.
or maybe not on the list.
It's a fun space. Like I am very curious who's going to actually make it to market. It's
Yeah.
the amount of investment necessary to progress robotics is crazy. And then
Yeah.
there's
And
it's
then
such high risk and high reward as well. But capital's really hard. It's just something I've
I
learned
think
more over
ARPA
my career.
they want in 5 years or something. So I guess
Yeah.
we'll find out in a few years.
Yeah, we'll see. Awesome. But yeah, I'll let you know when the next event is and kind of building towards that. But thank you for being part of School MedTech. It's a grand experiment, and I'm excited to see how it grows. And eventually, these calls will have like 100 people on it if we keep making it interesting. And now that I know how to do a setup that's not terrible, it'll be much faster in the beginning. Yeah, thank you for all the
Right.
support, especially when I was looking at that CTO role and doing all this. This is
Mhm.
great. Yeah, I'll let you run, dude. I know you got a lot going on with school and everything else.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Yeah,
See you next time.
awesome. All right, I'll see you again. Bye. Awesome. Awesome. All right. And then goodbye, LinkedIn and YouTube. I'm going to end that one next. And this is fantastic. Appreciate y'all.